I kind of feel like we are held hostage to some of the shortcomings of the system that have allowed all this debt to build up. A lot of it is unproductive debt. And now our options are increasingly constrained because the answer is, well, we can't do that because if we do, the whole debt pile, just becomes an inferno and burns everything down. Is there a potential way in which we can have the malinvestment, the bad debts clear the system and get back to a more sort of sane and sustainable baseline? And even if there isn't an elegant way to do that, would we be better off if it did, if we just took the pain, had a massive depression for some focused period of time? And yeah, it would be god awful, but we could emerge from it kind of free of the shackles of this increasingly, hostage situation that we find ourselves in.
I think the challenge is that because we've constructed the system this way, it becomes like a shark that can't stop swimming, otherwise it drowns. Basically, the debt, a credit-based system has to keep growing, otherwise it collapses. There's kind of no in between. So, so let's say you go back theoretically to the 1800s. You have, gold as base money. You have claims on that. Claims maybe a few multiples of the base money, but it's not massive, right? And so when you have a recession, some of the malinvestment gets cleared out, and you kind of restart from there. Whereas in going back to like 2008, there were something like 60 claims on base money, meaning that, for example, the total debt in the system, just from memory, was something like 60 times higher than the amount of base money in the system.
It's just bananas, and I'm sure it's worse
Yeah.
now. But anyways, continue.
Well, it's actually less now because they
Oh,
created
that's
so much
good.
new base money, but it's still, I mean, it's double
Right.
digit multiple. And we saw the same thing kind of happen back in the 1920s, where you had, this huge gap between all the debt in the system and then the base money, and then ended up increasing the base money. And so I think the way the system's structured, it's hard to do it in a disciplined manner. It's again, it's kind of like asking, why are there no countries with no central banks? And it's kind of like saying this system is kind of it's designed to always grow. And I think that until we kind of structure the system differently, it's hard to do it in a sustainable way.
Yeah,
Now,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want your remaining answer to address this point, which is because you brought up the limiting effect of finite resources out there, right? So we have a system that's designed for eternal growth. We are entering a period where resource growth is becoming constrained. So at some point, isn't the system almost sort of doomed that it's never going to get the eternally growing resources it needs to always grow the way that it mathematically has to?
in the long arc of time, yes, I think so. And that sounds, doomy, right? But I think if you go back in history, I mean, these sort of systems don't last this long. This particular fiat system from the 70s has been the longest lasting and most sophisticated, grandest version of it. But I think people should be careful about having recency bias. They think that the systems function this way for 50 years. Why can't it go for another 50 years or 150 years? But the history of the world is kind of the history of changing financial systems, changing money, kind of changing things like that. And so I think that as we look out longer term, I do think that this system's unsustainable, and that the way our money works, decades from now will probably look quite different than how it looks now.
All right. And my guess is, don't let me put words in your mouth, but one of the reasons why your hair's not on fire and you're not running around saying, oh my gosh, the fiat dollar system is going to collapse eventually, is you have some optimism that blockchain-based solutions may provide, sort of an interesting successor to what's going on here.
I think that's the most credible way to maybe introduce something new, right? But it's still early technology. I mean, Bitcoin's 13 years old. It's being tested to see how it's going to handle that. I think basically digital bearer assets, particularly if one can capture the majority of the liquidity and network effect, introduce a new way of doing things. But that's kind of the expectation or the hope of the expectation of what's possible. But there are still ways that can be messed up or that can be disrupted in some way. So it's something I'm watching, and I think it's worth looking at it, building on it, exploring it.